warm welcome to this Festival of Ideas event. My name is Kate Revilius and I'm a science journalist based here in York. I'm delighted and really excited to have been invited to chair this event, Different: What Apes Can Teach Us About Gender. Frans de Waal is a Dutch-American biologist and primatologist known for his work on the behaviour and social intelligence of primates. He's the New York Times best-selling author of Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? And Our Inner Ape, among many other works. He's named as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people, and he's currently the C.H. Candler Professor in Emory University's Psychology Department and Director of the Living Links Centre at the Yerkes National Primate Research Centre. We're delighted to welcome Frans, who's going to chat with me tonight about his latest book, Different: What Apes Can Teach Us About Gender. During our conversation, we'll talk about his research and fascinating observations of primates, and we'd like to ask you to take part in the discussion too by adding your questions throughout using the Q&A button on your screen. The planned format for the event tonight is for Frans and I to chat for 30 to 40 minutes, and then in the remaining time I'll bombard Frans with the questions that you all throw up. Welcome, Frans. It's an honour to have you here. You've been studying ape behaviour for over 5 decades, and during that time you've revealed that our nearest relatives have a huge capacity for empathy and fairness, and that cooperation is just as important as competition. Now you've turned your attention to gender and shone a spotlight on gender roles and gender identity in chimpanzees and bonobos, highlighting the similarities and the difference with our own species. Perhaps you can start off by telling us what sparked your curiosity in this topic, and what does gender mean for a non-human primate?
Yeah, let me explain why I wrote the book. I wrote the book knowing that it's a controversial topic and that it's very easy to step on toes. And so I've been very careful with it. But I wrote it because each time I talk about sex differences in the primates and say that, for example, males are more violent than females, or females show more empathy and caring than males. People ask me more about it. They want to know more about it. They're curious. I think people are curious about the biology behind gender differences, not knowing how complex that issue is, in the sense that it's always intertwined with culture. It's impossible to separate out what is cultural and what is biological, but there is clearly something biological going on. So people are very curious about it, and I thought I need to write a book about it. And the thing is that our 2 closest relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, are not the same. If they were the same in their behavior, it would be a very simple comparison. But they are very different in their behavior. The bonobo is peaceful and sexy and female-dominated. The chimpanzee is quite violent and male-dominated. So there you have already an immediate contrast. And then on top of that, another complexity is that we think that what we see in the primates is instinct and what we see in humans is culture. But actually in primates, you also see culture and learning going on. And in humans, you also see biology and instinct going on. So it makes for a complex picture, but I've done my best to illuminate how we compare with the other primates without necessarily saying that we should act like the other primates. I think we should act like humans, but we can learn something about our gender differences from looking at them. And we can also learn something about our gender diversity by looking at them, because gender is an interesting concept. And so let me start, and then we can have our discussion by saying what I think is sex and gender. Sex is the biological side. Sex is mostly binary, not 100%. It's probably 98% male, female, binary. And sex in biology is defined by the genitals, the hormones, the chromosomes, the gametes, we would say, so sperm and eggs. And so sex is fairly simple in that regard. As soon as you look into it, it's more complex. Now, gender, I usually divide in masculine and feminine. Gender is what is constructed socially. and the sort of norms we impose on how you have to behave as a man or as a woman. And so it's more masculine and feminine and everything in between. So gender is a much more flexible concept. And I think gender also applies to the other primates because they have such a slow development. So a chimpanzee or a bonobo is adult when they're 16, meaning that they learn a lot of things in their life also, just like we do, including probably how you have to behave like a male and a female. So I don't exclude the gender concept for them, but in humans, clearly it's a very useful concept and very complex. And there's an enormous amount of variability in how it is expressed. That there's gender identity, sexual orientation, all these issues come up when you study the primates. And so gender is a complex issue, but I think the comparison can be made with other primates. And the other primates, once you see characteristics that occur in all of them, like in all the primates and in humans, you're getting, of course, close to biology, and it gets interesting to compare that with what we know.
So, can you tell us why you've particularly focused on chimps and bonobos and where we fit in that family tree with them?
Yeah, our closest relatives are the apes. Apes are different from monkeys. We are basically apes. We are large primates without tails. I know that some people think that they are different from the apes, but there's no good reason not to call humans apes, I think. And the comparison with monkeys is a bit more problematic. But with apes, we can compare ourselves. And the two closest ones are chimpanzees and bonobos. So we split from chimps and bonobos about 6 million years ago, we think. And they split from each other much later, which means that they are equally distant to us or equally close, whatever you want to call it. There's no good reason to look only at chimpanzees. As most scientists, they ignore the bonobos because they're not happy with the peacefulness of the bonobos, so to speak. They have concepts about human evolution in which violence is very important, and the bonobo is just too peaceful for them and too female dominated. So some scientists try to push the bonobo aside, but there's no good reason to do that. Genetically, they're exactly equally close to us, and so the story of chimps and bonobos is exactly equally relevant to us.
Mm-hmm. So, some people would say that gender is a cultural construct and that we're born blank slates and that it's our culture that exerts the pressure to make us fall into line and fit the rules of masculinity and femininity. And this starts the day we're born and we're dressed in pink or blue and given dolls or trains to play with. But your observations suggest that gender is not just shaped by external pressure, and in fact we're born with some internal preferences. And
Yeah.
one way we can see this is the way that apes play. So can you tell us a bit more about what we can learn from the toys that chimpanzees and bonobos choose and the games that they play?
Yeah, so female primates, and this is not even true just for the apes, this is true for all the primates. There's 200 species of them. Female primates are very interested in infants from very young. So if a mother comes in a monkey group and she has a newborn, she's going to be surrounded by young females who hang around her and they want to touch the baby if they are allowed to. Young males are not really in that crowd. They're not particularly interested. If you give toys to monkeys or apes, it's the females who pick up the dolls. They want to hold them. They hold them on their belly and on their back, the way they would carry a young. In the apes, we often see that they hold the doll against their nipple as if they're nursing them. In the wild, we know that chimpanzee females, young females, pick up rocks and wooden logs to carry them and build nests for them. And so they make their own dolls, so to speak. And that's all related to their enormous interest in infants. They want to hold infants. And when they get a little bit older and more experienced, they become the babysitters for the mothers. The mothers will leave their babies. Once they can trust these young females, they will leave their babies with them and they will become the babysitters. And all of this is very important for young females to train their maternal skills. For the rest of their life, they will have children. And maternal skills need to be learned. So we speak of the maternal instinct, but maternal skills are extremely complex. So, for example, since apes often sit upright, for a baby who's in their lap to reach the nipple is not self-evident. That's not a logical thing. The mother needs to help the baby to get there. So the mother needs to know how to do that. And if apes are inexperienced, like if you have a group of gorillas where one of the females is pregnant, but the gorillas have never had any babies in the group, which happens at zoos sometimes, we know that that mother is going to be in trouble. We know that she has to learn. And what zoos do sometimes is they bring in a human mother who every day comes in to nurse her baby in front of the gorillas, and the gorillas pick up some behavior from that. So the females are very interested in infants or in dolls. And this is sort of universal in all the primates. And I think in the human tests also, they find that girls are more interested in infants than boys are. And then the boys are very interested, the young males are very interested in wrestling, what we call rough and tumble play. That's what they like to do the whole day, mock fighting. They test their skills that way, they develop their skills that way. But they also, it's very important for them for adult life that they learn how to control their physical strengths. They're going to be stronger than the females. They're going to be stronger than the young. They need to know exactly how strong they are. And it's very dangerous. It would be very dangerous in a human house if you have a man and a woman and children, and the man doesn't know how strong he is. If he has no understanding that he's a lot stronger than these kids are. And so to control your strengths is very important. Learning how to lose and how to win is also very important. So that's what the males are busy with. And this is also universal. In all the primates, we find that young males wrestle more than young females. And in all the human studies that I know, we find that boys do more wrestling and mock fighting than girls do. Now, remember, all of this is statistical, is that these are averages with means, basically means with a distribution around them. And so there are overlaps. And so it's like with the length of a man and a woman. Men are taller than women, but there are some women who are taller than most men, and there are some men who are shorter than most women. So you have all that variability, and the same is true for this behavior. So you're going to have individuals, you're going to have females who like to wrestle, you're going to have males who like to pick up an infant. So yeah, you have all that variability going on, but the averages are quite different between the two.
So we've had a nice question here from a member of the audience, Kalina, who said, in terms of the toy preferences, how do you know that female apes are not just mimicking the behaviour of other females? How do you know it's innate?
That's right. Is they are actually mimicking the behavior, and that's how they learn the maternal skills. And there is an element of what I call self-socialization going on, in that young females like to emulate and imitate adult females, usually their mother, but doesn't need to be. And young males like to emulate the males that they see around them. And I call that self-socialization. And right there, you get already the influence of the environment. The environment influences behavior. And so there is a biological component in that we see in all the primates. We see the females being really interested in dolls and infants. But there's also a learning component to it, clearly, and a self-socialization. And self-socialization, I think, is underestimated. In humans, we think we adults, we socialize the young. But I think there's a lot of self-socialization in that the young imitate adults of their gender, usually, at least of the gender that they identify with. And so for example, there was a recent study on orangutans in the forest where they found that young females, they copy exactly the diet of their mom. They eat exactly the same foods as their mother. Young males don't. The young males watch adult males who come by and copy part of their diet. And so that self-socialization idea, I think, is very powerful and also applies to human children. And it applies even to transgender children, because there's a biologist, Joan Roughgarden, who's a trans woman herself, who has proposed that transgender children identify with the adult of the opposite sex that they're born with, and emulate them. And so they become more masculine or more feminine as a result of that emulation. So it's a very good idea, I think, and it may apply to both other primates and ourselves.
That's really interesting. Um, right, moving on, in terms of when chimps and bonobos reach puberty, their bodies change and they start to advertise their sexual attractiveness. And there are many similarities in human teens, but also some distinct differences, including their ability with chimps and bonobos to tell each other apart from looking at one another's bottoms. Now, your work on bottom recognition led you to being awarded the Ig Nobel Prize, a parody of the Nobel Prize for research that makes people laugh and then makes them think. So tell us a bit more about bottom recognition and the other ways in which apes advertise their sexual prowess.
Yeah. So the female bonobos and chimps, they have a sexual swelling, a genital swelling, which is like a balloon, a pink balloon that they carry on their behind. And of course, since they're only fertile now and then, they're not always like that. That is only now and then that you get to see it. And the males are very attracted to it. And the females advertise their fertility with it. And there are experiments now with computer screens where you can show that the males are very good at recognizing individuals by their behinds. And the females are very interested in it. If you do mirror tests, for example, with females like to look at their behind in the mirror, because that's a very important part of their body that they never get to see, and so they turn around and look at it. And the males don't turn around in front of the mirror. They're not interested in their own behinds. So it's a very important sexual signal. And what we have done, we humans, we have moved sexual signals to the face more. We have moved them to the front. Face, breasts, issues like that. And the behind, I think women should be happy that they don't have these genital swellings, because I think they're very cumbersome. And the female chimps and bonobos, they have trouble sitting down when they have them. And so they have this ornamentation on the back that we don't have. And so we have moved a lot of gender characteristics to the face. And faces, human faces are very gender specialized, in the sense that people have done tests. Humans can recognize the gender of a person by their face, even if you crop out all the hair and you don't use makeup, you have just this part of the face. We can, within a second, with almost 100% accuracy, say if someone is a man or a woman. And that means that we are very in tune with gender, and gender is very important, I think, for us, just as it is for all the other primates, who are also very good at telling the genders apart. And this move to the face is also enhanced. Of course, we have beards, and we have we epilate our eyebrows, and we have makeup, and we have hairstyles. But the face itself, without all that, is already quite different. And then another thing is that we ornament ourselves, and women do this more than men, self-ornamentation, and the same is true for chimps and bonobos, is that they ornament themselves by draping things around their shoulders. In the wild, they may put a monkey skin around their shoulders, a monkey that they have hunted, and they put it around them. In captivity, they may take artificial objects that they put around them. And so there is a tendency in the females more than in the males to ornament themselves. But this has never been very well studied. I think there should be studies done on it. But from all the stories that I know, it's much more females who do that than males.
So one of the things that's really fascinating in your book is you say that not all apes conform to the gender that's associated with their biological sex, and you write about a chimp in particular called Donna who demonstrates this gender diversity. Can you tell us a bit more about how common that is and what you observe?
I don't think we know exactly how frequent these individuals are, but I know over my lifetime, I've seen many chimps and bonobos. I know quite a few. The males, typically the situation is that they don't want to play the macho role. So you may have a big male chimpanzee who you think could be alpha male, but he's not interested at all. He doesn't want to play these games. He stays out of confrontations. And so he never rises in the rank order. So he doesn't play the male games. In females, you may have females who act more masculine. And so Donna is a good example. Donna is a female chimp that I knew since she was very little. She was only 3 years old. And so at that time already, she liked to wrestle with adult males, which young females rarely do. But she loved to wrestle with adult males. She loved to wrestle with me too. And she invited them and they would respond to her, which is unusual. The adult males, they usually don't play much with young females. So they responded to her, which was the first sign that she was different from the rest. And then she developed into, when she got into puberty and became adult around the age of 15, she developed into a sort of very masculine looking female. And from a distance, you would think it was a male. She had the big hands and the big head and the big hair. Males have a lot more hair on their body than the females. And she acted like a male. She would intimidate others like a male. She would move along with the males when they were displaying in the group. She was not aggressive. She didn't hurt anyone. She was not aggressive, but she acted like a male and she joined the males. And so from a distance, she would swear she was a male. And I cannot ask her identity, but I bet she identified like a male. That's how it looked to me. And so Donna was completely well integrated. She was completely accepted in the group, and she still is actually. She's still alive. And this is true for all these individuals that I know who act a little bit different. Maybe it's 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 individuals who act a little bit different from their gender role, the typical one. As far as I know, they're always well accepted. I've never seen that they're not accepted in the group.
And the other fascinating thing you talk about is that there is some evidence for gender differences in the brain from studies that have been done on humans, and that possibly people who identify as transgender have brains that have developed with the gender that doesn't match their biological sex. So what's the evidence for that? And do you think that is also happening in the apes from what you've observed?
Oh, for the apes, I don't know that. But for humans, we have data. There are studies on the brains of post-mortem studies on individuals who were transgender, and indicating that a trans woman has a brain more like a woman. So even though she's born as a male, she's a trans woman and she has a brain more like a woman, and trans men maybe more like a man, even though I think that evidence is weaker. So these are findings that were done by Dick Swab in post-mortem analysis of the brain. And there are some other studies that seem to indicate these differences in the brain. And so the theory that we have now, but I'm not sure we can say that has been proven at all. But the theory that Dick Swab developed is that during the fetus development, of the human fetus development, the first thing that differentiates into male and female are the genitals. And the second thing, in the second half of the pregnancy, the second thing that differentiates are the brains becoming male and female. And that in some individuals, less than 1% of the individuals, these two tracks separate. So instead of being joined, the genitals and the brain go in the same direction, they go in different directions. And that's maybe the cause of individuals being transgender and having a different identity from the sex that they're born with. So there are biological explanations. At least there are theories, let's say, and the evidence is not overwhelming, but there is some evidence that biology is involved in this. Yeah.
So I'd like to talk a bit next about sexually adventurous females. So Darwin promoted the thinking that male promiscuity and female monogamy are hardwired, and that it's more profitable for females to be coy and to hold back till they can identify the males with the best genes. But your observations are turning that thinking on its head and presenting us with sexually adventurous females and demonstrating the advantages of that. What kind of relationships do you see, and how does it shatter the kind of concepts we have in our human relationships?
Yeah, the idea that female sexuality is passive is a Victorian idea, I think, that already Darwin supported, yeah. and has been around for at least 100 years, or maybe has been around for much longer, but it is a very popular idea that we are now in the last 20 years, I would say, we are completely undermining. In biology, we really don't believe in that anymore. And in human society, I think we are questioning that idea. And in biology, it started with our ability to track DNA. You look at a nest of birds, songbirds who are monogamous, so-called monogamous, and you check their eggs, and you find that some of these eggs have been fertilized by a male who's not part of the pair. So initially, the scientists, they said, well, maybe the females got raped by some males who came by. But no, we now know that these females actively go out and mate with certain males. Sneaky. It's a sneaky thing that they do. And it's probably to their advantage. It's probably to their advantage to have more genetic diversity in their eggs than just one male. So we first discovered it in the birds, and now we know for the primates also, which called usually the field is usually called female choice. The females are a very important partner in the choice of mating partners. So initially, our view in primatology was the males decide everything. The males have a hierarchy. The top male does more than the bottom male in terms of matings, and the females were. We didn't talk about them. They were just the object of sexual activity. And now we have a very different view, partly as a result of female primatologists, I think, who started to pay attention to this. And now we view it really as a sort of two-sided spectacle where the males have their hierarchy, which determines which males can mate and not mate. And the low-ranking males, they do mate, but more behind the bushes and at night. And the females have their own agenda, and they may prefer completely different males than the ones who are in the top of the hierarchy. And so the females arrange other matings. And so the picture that we used to have is that the alpha male does most of the 90% of the offspring are by the alpha male. But we know now from paternity testing that that's not the case at all. He may have more offspring than other males, that's possible. But the female choice and the sneakiness of low-ranking males make that there's a lot of other stuff going on.
And you say in the book that this sexually adventurous behaviour brings an advantage in terms of protection. I think it was the chimps in particular. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so many primates are infanticidal, and chimpanzees are, the males may kill infants. And not in bonobos. Bonobos have the perfect solution to this. The females are dominant. Mm-hmm. Females are dominant, and they are very much against aggression by males. And so as soon as a male would do something that a female doesn't like, she's going to scream, and all the other females will jump on that male. So the bonobos have solved that issue in a very radical way. But the chimpanzees don't. The chimpanzees, the males are dominant, and the males are sometimes infanticidal. And since male primates don't know who their offspring are, they don't know about reproduction, people often confuse that. Is because the BBC programs, they always say that males fight over the right to fertilize a female. Male primates and male animals don't know anything about fertilization. They don't fight over the right to fertilize the female or have kids. They fight over the right to have sex. Mm-hmm. But sex they understand. So the male chimpanzee, we think, and this is true for many male animals, I think, not just for chimpanzees, is that male animals are pre-programmed to be nice with females that they had recent sex with, to be nice to those females and her offspring, to be friendlier to them than to anybody else. And as a result of this rule of thumb that they follow, they're going to be automatically nice to their own offspring because their own offspring is among the ones that they benefit. So males have that rule of thumb, and females abuse that rule, so to speak. They trick the males by having sex with lots of males. And so if a female chimpanzee, and that's what they do, when the female chimpanzee is fertile, she tries to have sex with a lot of males. And all these males who have sex with her are going to be later, when her baby comes, going to be nicer with her, and maybe even protective of the baby. And so we think that that's one of the benefits. Sarah Hardy is the anthropologist who developed these ideas. She calls it the many males hypothesis. She has females can follow two strategies. She says the best male hypothesis, which is that they go for the best male around and try to be fertilized by that male, or you go for many males and you protect your own offspring that way by including these males in your sexual contacts. So the sexual adventurism of females has certain advantages, and that's how we think that it evolved. In bonobos, of course, the bonobos are very sexually the most active of all the primates, I think. The bonobo female also has a large clitoris. So, and the largest clitoris among the mammals is in the dolphin. And the dolphin is a sort of like the bonobo of the sea. They have a lot of extra sex also, like the bonobos do. And so bonobos females, they have a lot of sex with each other. Not just with the males, but also with each other. And that is because they form a sisterhood. There's a high level of solidarity among them. That's how they control the males, by being, as a female, having a big coalition. And that is maintained partly by sexual activity between them. And so female bonobos actually they probably have more sex with each other than with the males.
So thinking about power structures, you talk in your book also about baboons, which I think you describe as the feminist nightmare.
Yeah.
And then at the other end of the extreme, you've got the bonobos with their matriarchal power structure, and chimps seem to be somewhere in between. So how do you think these different power structures have evolved, and why? Why do we see those differences?
Well, the baboon story became very famous because there was at the London Zoo, there was a colony of baboons that was studied by Zuckerman, a famous scientist. He was head of the Royal Society at some point, very famous scientist in the UK. And he popularized the idea that males are violent and males rule the females, and females have no say whatsoever in society. And he popularized that idea like 100 years ago. And the baboon is just not a good comparison. It is a feminist nightmare in some ways. And the baboon is a monkey and is quite distant. And I would want to get over the baboon story. And I think we need to look at chimps and bonobos. And in chimps and bonobos team, the females have a high level of solidarity. In chimps, it's not always visible because chimps in East Africa, they live spread out over the forest. And the females, when they meet a male, they're basically on their own much of the time. And it's hard to defend yourself against the male for a female chimp if she's alone. But in captivity, female chimps help each other. And so the power balance between males and females is quite much closer in captivity, where the females have more power because they are together. And then the bonobo has reached the pinnacle of this, because the bonobo females, they're always together and they have an even stronger sisterhood. And we think that the difference between the two, chimps and bonobos, comes from their ecology. Is that the chimps live in forests in which they need to spread out in order to get enough food. They have competition from gorillas who eat the ground vegetation. And so the bonobos don't have competition from gorillas, so all the ground vegetation is available, and they have a richer forest. And so everybody can travel together, including all the females can be together. And when all these females are together, they are a very strong power block. And that's how they got dominance over the males. So we think there's an ecological explanation for the difference between the two species. But the level of solidarity is always present in the females of both chimps and bonobos. They both have a tendency, if males harass them, to defend each other, the females.
So it's really interesting that you're saying there that there's flexibility in that you put chimps in a different environment and they start to develop a different power structure in a way. And I'm wondering what we can say about humans, where we fit in that continuum of power structures, and what kind of women become leaders, and under what circumstances are you more likely to have female leaders or that sisterhood developing? What have we observed?
Well, female leadership is really not hard to find in the primates. I mean, all the primates, they have female hierarchies, and they have an alpha female. This is true for all the monkeys, it's true for all the apes. Whether the males are dominant or not over them is a sort of secondary issue, because the male and female worlds are often a bit separate, in the sense that females compete with each other more than with males. Males compete with each other more than with females. So there's more competition within the sexes. And then in addition, the female leadership is expressed among the females, and you may have a high-ranking female, like I described in my previous book, Mama, the chimpanzee female, who was alpha female for 40 years. And she had a big effect even on the male hierarchy, even though that was not her business. But a male, in order to be dominant in that colony, he needed her support. And so the males were very nice with her and with her kids, because she was a very important supporter for them. And so then you wonder, who's the most powerful? And I always make a distinction between physical dominance and power. So males may be physically dominant over females, but that doesn't mean that they always have more power than the females. You have sometimes in primate groups females who have a lot more power than most of the males in the group. So female leadership is really not hard to find. And when people say, they say that sometimes in human society, they say men make better leaders. I don't know, in the COVID crisis, I was not convinced of the male leadership that we had in this country, in the US. Or in Brazil and places like that. And I'm not sure that males always make better leaders than females. And female leadership is quite common in the primates. And so that argument really doesn't wash with me. And the thing about physical dominance is that physical dominance is only one of the many ways that you can compare the genders and compare individuals. So for example, in the chimpanzee group, the smallest male may be the alpha male, because he has the best connections and has the best supporters and female support and so on. The smallest male may be the alpha male. And people are often surprised by that. But in human society, the same is of course true, is that no one walks into a business in London to speak to the boss and walks up to the biggest guy present in the business and assumes that he must be the boss. That's not how humans work, we know that. And that's not how primate groups work. And so the dominance relationships are quite a bit more complex. And you have real leadership in the males also. The alpha males can be very popular if they are good at keeping order and protecting the underdog. They can become extremely popular. So people have this image of the alpha male as a monster, like a dictator. And that's not, I have known dictators like that, and I've known them in human society too. But most alpha males in the chimps are not like that. They are usually responsible leaders.
Quick question here from someone called Andrew saying, do you think that dominant human females take on male attributes rather than developing the dominant sisterhood?
I think there was a time where women thought that they had to do that. I'm not sure that's still the case, but I would think in the 90s, yeah, people thought that way. I don't think it's necessary at all, because as I say, I've known many primate females who are very powerful alpha females who really didn't act like males. One thing that is maybe important is to be even-handed. So what males do, alpha males, they break up fights in the group, and they do that in a very even-handed manner. They don't favor their friends, they don't favor their mother, they just break up fights and stop them. And they do it in a very even-handed manner. And that is more difficult for an alpha female. An alpha female often has family in the group. She may have children, and she may even have grandchildren. So she may have 12 individuals in the group who are related to her. And females have an extremely strong tendency to favor their family. If they jump into a fight, they're always going to defend their kids. And so that makes it a bit harder for an alpha female to be an even-handed controller of conflict in the group. And what females often do instead, because they don't often break up fights like the males do, what females do instead is fixing problems afterwards. They're very good at that. So Mama, the chimpanzee, what she would do after a fight between, let's say, two males, she would bring these two males together. She would grab one by the arm and bring him to the other and wait till they groom each other and then leave. And I've known other alpha females who did that kind of stuff. And so they don't step into the fights like the males often do, but they fix problems afterwards.
So let's talk a little bit about the dark side of behaviour. You've observed some really violent encounters. And as you've said, it's interesting how those conflicts are resolved. So what can we learn from those violent encounters, and what parallels do we have and don't we have?
Yeah, people often ask about rape. And the strange thing is that the rape is more common, I think, in humans than it is in the other primates. So except for orangutans, where we know rape is by younger males, not by the fully adult males, but apart from them, I don't think there's a lot of rape going on in the other primates. So in bonobos, it's completely excluded. Never heard of it. It's impossible because the females dominate. So that's an impossibility, I think. In the chimpanzees, there are very rare observations of rape. There are many observations of males intimidating females or beating up females. These things happen. But rape, forcing a forced copulation by a male is more common in our species. And I think in our species, we have set up families in homes. So a man, usually a man and a woman and children. And in that situation, it is possible for a man to control a woman and to do things without anybody else in the society even knowing about it. And that's not a possibility in a primate group. There's always others around who may interfere. And so in our situation, rape is most common between individuals who know each other. And our social setting has made it maybe possible for rape to be used more frequently. And we've seen, for example, during the COVID crisis, when we were locked up in homes, that domestic violence, including rape, went up in that period of time.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting that there's such a difference there. We've not got much time left, but one last question I'd like to ask you. It's sometimes argued that same-sex relationships can't make sense from an evolutionary perspective, and yet it turns out that same-sex relationships are not uncommon in apes and also in the wider animal kingdom. What can we learn from our rainbow cousins?
Yeah, so in bonobos is very common because I think 3/4 of the sexual activity has nothing to do with reproduction. And so male to male and female to female sex is actually very common. In chimpanzees and other primates, it's less common. I would say heterosexual activity is more common than homosexual activity, but you always have a few individuals who lean more to homosexual activity. I don't think they have exclusive orientations like that. And in humans, we also know that exclusive homosexuality is actually not so common. I think it's 0.5% of the population, whereas homosexual, usually what we consider gays and lesbian, is more like 4 to 5%. So in humans also not so common, but homosexual activity and behavior is very common and is very well accepted. There's really no problem with it. I've never noticed that there has been a problem with it. And the question that you ask about how could it have evolved if it doesn't lead to reproduction, that's a typical question in biology, has been. But it assumes a dichotomy. It assumes that the world is divided in homosexual individuals and heterosexual individuals. And I'm not sure that that's the case. I think that's a cultural distinction that we make. And for a long time, we didn't even accept bisexual individuals. For a long time, bisexual individuals were, people said, you're probably experimenting, you're not sure what you are, but we do now know now that bisexual people do exist. So it's more like a cultural putting in pigeonholes, and the dichotomy between homosexual individuals and heterosexual individuals, if that's not a real dichotomy in genetic terms, and we know that the genetics of homosexuality is a mess, basically. It's not very clear at all. So if there's not a clear genetic dichotomy, it's a nonsense question to ask how they could exist, because many homosexual individuals, of course, do reproduce. And so the assumption in the question that we used to ask in biology is homosexual activity will not lead to reproduction, but actually homosexual individuals do reproduce. Maybe a little bit less. I don't know the numbers on that, but I don't think that's the right question. I think I look at homosexual activity as a combination of same-sex attraction, which is very common in all the primates. Males hang out with males, females hang out with females, which is their friendships are usually with the same sex, So same-sex attraction is very common, and seeking of sexual pleasure is very common. And these two get hooked up at some way, and that's how I look at homosexual activity. I don't think we need to have a special evolutionary explanation for it.
It seems like we just overthink it, but
Maybe, maybe. Yeah, we make a big deal about it, and the other primates really don't. And I sometimes blame our language capacity. It's, of course, beautiful that we have the language capacity. We're using it at this moment. It's beautiful that we have it, but it makes us label everything. Everything needs to have a label. You're a man, you're a woman, you're hetero, you're homosexual. We need to label everything and pigeonhole everything. And then we also use it for intolerance. We use these labels also to insult others. And none of that happens in the other primates.
So I've got some really great questions from audience members. I'll just ask you a couple of these. Do we have evidence that young apes and children are aware of their gender from a very young age? How young are apes aware of their gender generally?
I know that the young males identify with and emulate adult males, and the young females emulate adult females, and there's a very clear attraction to that. So for example, and I cannot ask them how they identify, but if for example an adult male chimpanzee makes a beautiful display with all his hair up and banging things or uprooting trees or whatever he does. And the mothers keep all the kids close at that moment because it's a dangerous moment. Then when they release the kids, the young males, they will go to the same place where that adult male was displaying and bang the same thing or uproot the same tree with all their hair on end, and they emulate the behavior. So they clearly identify with that male, whereas the young females will not do that. And I don't know where that identification comes from, except for some inner sense of what their gender is. And I don't know how you define that or how you find that out, but I do think they know that they belong to that gender and not to the other one.
Mm-hmm. And this is from Leah. Do you think that the biological differences that cause gender and sex should affect the way that people are treated? Not in a negative way, but to get the best out of people. So, for example, should male and female children be taught in different ways?
Well, teaching, I think intellectual teaching, I would hope that we keep that similar between boys and girls. But physical activity, it is known that boys are physically more active than girls. There's many studies in many different countries where they put an accelerator on the children to see how much they run and how far they run and how fast and so on. And boys are physically more active than girls. And boys like to wrestle. We talked already about that. They like to mock fight and things like that. And I sometimes hear in schools in the US that, for example, they are now prohibiting kids from having physical contact, which I think is really a bad decision. And I do think boys have a greater need than girls for running around and doing things like that. I'm still not sure that means that you need to give boys and girls different ways of playing. You give them the same playtime and they fill it in the way they want it. I think that's the way to go.
Okay. With Donna, the female who grew to have a more male appearance and role, are there any other instances of primates who diverge from the sex binary from birth, such as how we observe intersex in humans?
Yeah, intersex. in animals, we usually speak of hermaphrodites, and they do occur. We know that they occur. I think the frequency is probably very similar to in humans. And of course, intersex has many different definitions. You can have intersex in terms of the gonads, the chromosomes, the hormones, the genitals. There's many sources of it. And it's a very complex issue on which I'm not a specialist, but I'm pretty sure that we can say that the same diversity we see in that regard in humans, we're going to see in other primates. We haven't paid attention to that. I think we in primatology, we have focused too much on typical male behavior and typical female behavior, because that's what we like to talk about. And just as in human society, we talk a lot about the typical and very little about the atypical. Mm-hmm. And I think in primatology, there's room for a lot of studies in this regard. Mm-hmm.
One final question. In your book, you talk about nuclear families and why we might have evolved to have nuclear families. So it seems like there's a disadvantage in that women are more likely to be raped, but there's also an advantage to it. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think we got the man involved in raising kids. Male chimps and bonobos do very, very little. The females do everything with the offspring. They carry them, they feed them, they protect them, and so on. The males do very, very little. We know, however, from adoptions, if a mother loses her life, that adult male chimps, they can adopt an infant, and they do that, and sometimes carry it around for 5 years. So they have fatherly tendencies, and they can be very good fathers, but usually they don't. I call it a potential. They have a potential. In the human male, this potential must be amplified enormously because we have evolved nuclear families, and so the males are much more involved. And that has enormous advantages. It has reduced the interbirth interval for women. So women can have babies every 2 years or so, which is an impossibility for the apes. So a chimpanzee female in the forest, she can have a baby maybe every 6 years. She cannot handle more than that, given their slow development. But we have populated the world with 8 billion people as a result of our different family structure in which males are involved. So it has enormous advantages in terms of care and provisioning and protection. It has been a very good deal in many ways, I would say. But yeah, it has a few disadvantages also, I think.
So I want to say a huge thank you for coming along and talking to us, and to audience members who I haven't been able to ask your question. I'd highly recommend purchasing a copy of Fran's book, Different: What Apes Can Tell Us About Gender, because I think some of the other questions, it's a really great read, and there's so much we haven't managed to cover tonight. The book's available from our partner bookseller, Fox Lane Books. And for more information on the book sales, please see the festival website or head direct to Fox Lane Books. Check out the website for full details of the events in the festival programme, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on these events and continue the conversation using the hashtag York Ideas. So, Frans, thank you so much for talking to us tonight, and I really look forward to reading some more of the book.